Ezekiel Miller here, 65 years old. 40 years crawling under engines other men gave up on. I never once asked another soul to carry what was mine to carry, until the night my son and daughter-in-law left my wife alone in a flood, and I found out exactly what 40 years of trust had bought them. That morning started ordinary. Coffee in the kitchen. Mabel at the table moving slower since her TIA last year, but her eyes still sharp as ever. Our daughter-in-law Priscilla came down smiling that smile that never quite touched her cheekbones. "Dad, your medication bottle's empty. Storm's coming this afternoon. You should get to Dr. Harmon's while the roads are clear." She wasn't wrong. The clinic was 90 miles east, the only place that carried the compound blend that kept my knees from locking. What I didn't know, standing there with my coffee going cold, was that Priscilla had poured every pill down the drain the night before, that she and my son Gideon had been building toward this day for weeks. Mabel gave me her go-on nod. "Gideon and I will look after her," Priscilla said, squeezing my shoulder. I drove off doing exactly what they needed me to do. 90 miles through gathering storm, prescription filled. Halfway home, at 5:15, my phone rang. Unknown number. Something told me to answer. "Sir, I'm Earl Gunderson, night security at the Riverside Motor Lodge. There's a woman here, says she knows your number by heart." Then Mabel's voice, broken up by rain hammering metal. "Ezekiel, they drove me to a motel, but it's closed. All dark. They took my wallet, my phone, changed the locks already." She wasn't crying. Mabel Louise Miller doesn't fall apart, but I heard the cold in her voice, the tightness of a woman holding herself together by will alone. "I'm sorry, Zeke. I know you had such a long drive today." She was apologizing to me, alone in the dark, and apologizing. The call dropped. I couldn't reach Earl again for 4 minutes, the longest 4 minutes of my life. Sitting there, I thought about Gideon's business proposal 3 months back, the $85,000 loan he'd wanted me to co-sign. I'd said no. I thought I'd refused him money. Sitting in that parking lot, I understood. I'd refused him a tool, and he'd found another way to get it. I pulled up my banking app. Balance, $200. I hadn't checked it in 11 weeks. Gideon had offered to manage the bill payments months ago, and I'd let him. Pending outbound wire, $960,000. I called my attorney, Barnaby Whitfield, before I even put the car in drive. They left Mabel outside in the rain. Half a second of silence. Then, "Don't call Gideon. Drive to Mabel. I'll handle the money." I hit the interstate as the storm broke wide open. My oldest friend, Thurston Caldwell, 40 years since we met on a job site with nothing but dirty hands and nothing to prove, already had a tow rig running south to escort me. "I'll handle the road," he said. "You focus on driving." The memories came the way they do when you've got nothing left but the wheel and your own guilt. 6 months back, an electric bill nearly doubled. Gideon explained it away. I believed him because I wanted to. 4 months back, Mabel's checkbook vanished, turned up in the freezer, and we all laughed it off. 2 months back, she asked about her father-in-law's property papers, and I walked out of the room to answer a phone call and never finished that conversation. Small things, together, enough to knock a man off his feet. Barnaby called with the wire still pending, a narrow window before the morning batch cleared it. "I need Mabel on the phone with the bank herself. She can do anything she sets her mind to," I said. The GPS rerouted me onto a 2-lane hill road with a 40-foot drop and no guardrails, flooded blind curves. Thurston's voice steady in my ear the whole way. "Ease through it. Don't stop moving." My tires lost the ground for 2 full seconds before the gravel shoulder caught me. At 10:17 that night, my headlights swept across a dead sign. Riverside Motor Lodge, temporarily closed, empty lot, caution tape snapping in the wind. Then, under the office awning, a shape with a hand lifting slowly against the glare. I recognized her shoes before her face, the blue ones with Velcro straps I'd ordered her last Christmas, because her fingers don't always manage laces anymore. She was wedged between an ice machine and the wall, 3 suitcases stacked beside her like a small fortress, soaked through, silver hair plastered to her forehead, arms wrapped tight around herself, the way a person holds on when they're fighting to keep every piece of themselves in place. Earl Gunderson stood a few feet off in a yellow slicker. He told me later he'd offered 3 times to call 911. Each time she'd said no, that she wanted to talk to her husband first. "Mabel," I said. She looked up. Not relief, shame. Deep, gut-level shame that had no business on that woman's face. "I'm sorry, Zeke. I know you had such a long drive." I crossed to her and held her, felt how cold she was, how she shook in small waves she was trying to hide. "Yes, I did," I told her. "Yes, I did." Helping her stand, I saw her guard her left wrist, a band of dark bruising already swelling. My jaw locked. "Priscilla said the room was paid for," she told me, voice steady, even as her hand gripped my arm with every word. When I asked about the property papers, Gideon held my arm, said he just needed me to listen, said I was confused. "You are not confused," I said. "I know that," she answered softly. "I've always known that." Inside the largest suitcase, wrapped in a dish towel on top of her nightgown, sat the coin collection I'd built for 40 years, and Mabel's jade jewelry, $200,000 in family assets, Gideon had packed and never bothered to open. The night before, I'd overheard him and Priscilla whispering over what looked like account routing numbers. I hadn't confronted them, no proof, and I didn't want to be a man who accuses his own son without cause, but I hadn't slept either. I'd quietly packed those suitcases myself, the coins, the jade, the original property deed I'd hidden behind the water heater 6 months earlier, when Gideon first started asking about transfer timelines. Familiar luggage nobody looks at twice. Gideon had loaded it into the car and driven it straight to his mother without ever checking inside. I called 911, described the bruising in clinical detail for the dispatcher. Width, color, pattern consistent with a grip, not a fall. It went into the case file before we ever spoke to a detective. Then Barnaby called again, urgency sharpening his voice. "The wire's still pending. I need Mabel on a recorded line with the bank in 90 minutes, or we lose our best shot." "She'll be ready," I said. The ambulance reached us at 11:14. Paramedics wrapped Mabel in thermal blankets. She answered every question, with a calm clarity that made one of them glance at me in something like admiration. "Your wife is sharp," he said. "Always has been," I told him. 40 years, she's never once let me win an argument." From inside the ambulance, Mabel called back, "That's because you're usually wrong, Ezekiel." The edges had come back into her voice. That was enough. Barnaby explained it to her plainly over speakerphone. Under California's Elder Financial Abuse Statute, Gideon had authority to pay bills, not to wire fortunes. What he'd done was fraud on its face. He needed Mabel to confirm her identity to the bank's fraud unit and formally state she never authorized the transfer. "I've been doing hard things my entire life," Mabel said. "Put them on." At 11:31, she sat upright on the stretcher, oxygen clip on her finger, and dismantled our son's plan, one precise sentence at a time. Full name, date of birth, the exact nature of Gideon's authorization, her explicit denial of consent. I stood in the rain and listened, and my eyes burned for reasons that had nothing to do with weather. While she spoke, Barnaby worked a second line, reaching the on-call duty judge through channels he knew by memory from years of elder abuse cases. He submitted 4 pieces of evidence electronically: the bank's fraud flag, the photograph of Mabel's bruised wrist, the fake motel receipt with its mismatched reservation number, and Mabel's own recorded statement. 11 minutes later, the judge signed an emergency protective order. At 12:47 a.m., Gideon tried to log into the account. The system locked him out instantly. "He knows something's wrong," Barnaby said. "Good," I said. By 3:47, the fraud department called back. Full administrative hold placed. The $960,000 wire frozen 23 minutes before it would have cleared. The 3 smaller transfers already completed would be harder to claw back, but the big one was stopped cold. "Now," Barnaby said, "we go take back your house." He sent me step-by-step instructions. I sat in my car and worked through them. First, the smart home access panel. I found 2 unauthorized phones logged in, Gideon's and Priscilla's, and cut them both loose with 2 taps. Every lock, every light, answered only to me again. Second, I reversed the camera feeds Gideon had redirected, and every room in that house streamed live to my phone. I watched my son pacing the living room in his undershirt, phone to his ear, an open bottle of wine and 2 glasses on Mabel's coffee table. A celebration interrupted. Priscilla sat frozen on the couch, her practiced composure gone entirely. Third, I remotely locked the SUV in the driveway. Through the camera, I watched Gideon spin toward the window as the horn blared 3 times and died. "What was that?" Priscilla's voice cracked through the feed. "He locked the car," Gideon said, hollow. Fourth, I opened the house speaker and played the message Barnaby had recorded at the motel 2 hours earlier. Calm, unhurried, the voice of a man who's already won. It laid out everything: the frozen wire, the revoked access, the locked vehicle, the protective order already transmitted to the sheriff's department. The party is over. Gideon's knees buckled. He hurled his phone at the wall. Priscilla screamed for someone named Sterling to come get her, and watched the call die the second it connected. She turned on Gideon with everything she had. "You said this was airtight. You said your father was old and slow." Gideon just stared at her, something breaking behind his eyes. Then he found the camera, walked up to it, and stood there with nothing left to say. I set the phone down and told Thurston to take us somewhere for breakfast. At dawn, Pat Crawford, who'd run her bakery on Magnolia Street for 22 years and never once turned away a paying customer, took one look at Mabel's bruised wrist and led her to a table without a word. By the time Barnaby arrived with the protective order, Pat had already taped a printed still from the motel security footage to her front window with a handwritten card. "This establishment does not serve those who harm their elders. Not today, not ever." Mabel saw it, set down her coffee cup, straightened her spine, and said one word: "Good." At 7:15, 2 sheriff's cruisers sat quiet along Carver Lane. Detective Lorna Vasquez was already assigned, already reviewing account activity since 3 a.m. Gideon came out barefoot, shouting about sheriffs and frozen accounts and debt collectors, sounding, impossibly, like the wronged party. "Where your mother's silence kept you safe," I told him. Something moved behind his eyes for just a second. The boy, I remembered. Then Priscilla appeared in the doorway, phone raised, already performing for an audience that existed only in her head. "We sacrificed everything for that woman," she announced. Mabel stepped out of Thurston's car, chin level, eyes clear, and handed the nearest officer the fake receipt, then turned her wrist over to show the bruise. Detective Vasquez looked at Gideon with the flat expression of someone who's heard every excuse there is. "I'd like you to come with me." "Dad," Gideon said, "just my name." "Go with the detective, Gideon," I said quietly. The handcuffs went on at 7:41. He didn't struggle. He just found my face in the small crowd of neighbors and held it for 3 seconds, before the officer turned him away. Priscilla lasted 4 more minutes. A repossession truck pulled up for her Mercedes, 3 months delinquent, and I'd formally withdrawn as co-signer the moment the fraud was confirmed. She threw the keys at the man's chest. It was gone in 6 minutes. At the station, Gideon used his one call to reach a business contact who'd promised him a contract. The man called me 30 seconds later, disgusted, to say he'd told my son never to call again, that a man who abandons his mother in a flood to buy himself time doesn't get his signature. Then Detective Vasquez came back down the porch steps with news that hit harder than anything else that day. On Gideon's laptop, still logged in on the kitchen table, image editing files, an ordinary pregnancy test, negative, and an edited version showing positive. Purchase records for novelty prank test kits. Priscilla had never been pregnant. I thought of Mabel's face the morning they'd announced it, both hands pressed to her heart. I turned away so the detective wouldn't see mine. Behind me, I heard Mabel ask, barely audible, "Was any of it real?" "No, Mrs. Miller," the detective said. "I don't believe it was." Mabel made a sound I'd never heard from her, and hope never to again. Not crying. Something older than crying. I held her. Gideon was released on his own recognizance that morning, pending arraignment, free, and utterly without resources. By 11, he and Priscilla walked into Pat's bakery, with nowhere else to go. Every card had stopped working. Pat met them at the counter. "We're completely out of everything for the 2 of you. We have been since this morning." Someone's phone was already recording. The clip hit a local news account with 250,000 followers before they reached the sidewalk. By early afternoon, it had crossed 3 million views. Priscilla's sponsorship deals died by email within the hour. Her social accounts were suspended by evening. A bus driver recognized Gideon from the same clip and refused to let him board. That afternoon, a film crew pulled up to Carver Lane with a signed 30-day lease Barnaby had arranged on my behalf. 2 garbage bags, everything Gideon and Priscilla owned in that house, were set out on the lawn. Priscilla looked across the street at the RV where Mabel and I now lived, and whatever composure she had left simply gave out. She sat down on the wet grass beside her bag and broke completely, without an audience left to perform for. Gideon crossed the street alone. "Dad, you took everything. Are you trying to put your own son in the ground?" I thought of teaching him to ride a bike, running alongside, letting go, watching him pedal half a block before he realized I wasn't there anymore. "I didn't take a single thing from you," I said. "Everything I touched belonged to your mother and me. 40 years of grease under my fingernails, her cooking dinner on a knee that never stopped hurting. So you'd never go to bed hungry. You used our love like a passkey. Walked through every door we left open, emptied every room and locked us out in the rain, and called it caregiving. The cold you're standing in isn't something I built. You built it yourself, one lie at a time." He broke down completely. Behind him, Priscilla stood at the edge of the lawn with nothing left to say. Mabel came down the RV steps and looked at her son with eyes that had been through the whole night and come out the other side clear. "I prayed you'd come back to the boy who fell asleep on my shoulder at church. I stayed quiet so you wouldn't be upset, and while I was quiet, you took everything we built. I don't know where that boy went, Gideon, but he's not standing in front of me." The debt collectors arrived one more time, document in hand. Gideon had nothing left to give them. I took Mabel's hand. She squeezed back with all 5 fingers, the way she has since our first year married, when she wanted me to know exactly where she meant to be. "Thurston," I said, "let's go." The RV pulled away, and I didn't look back. 65 years taught me what a man owes the people he loves. That storm taught me something harder. Sometimes the most honest thing a father can do is step aside and let the truth teach what love alone never could. If someone you love is quietly being erased from their own life, don't wait the way I waited. Don't mistake silence for peace or convenience for trust. I got one night, one storm, and 40 years of friendship to make it right. Not everyone gets that chance. Family justice isn't cruelty. It's refusing to let someone else's harm become the price of your love. I built a record, called the right people, and let the law carry what it was built to carry. I'd do it again.